and welcome to Pricing College with your host, Aidan Campbell.
And Joanna Wells.
In today's episode, we want to cover the concept of framing, and framing in any sort of environment, such as an interview, any negotiation, but in particular, discussions with procurement.
All right, so what is framing? Framing is a very important concept. It's used, as Aidan said, a lot in negotiation. It's when one perspective and another perspective clash. Because frames, in a sense, are point of views, perspectives that everybody has when they interact with another person. So wherever you go, there's always going to be framing occurring. So it's important to know how to utilize that to your advantage.
I think everyone has been in discussions or meetings with people where there's a clear power structure or a pre-stated or unstated mechanism where one person is in the moral correct area versus the other. You know, you can think of even in a courtroom where a judge sits high up on the stage, or much higher up than the people, the lawyers and the people in the court. That puts a much stronger moral position for that judge. You probably also have it when you're a school kid and you're called in to see the headmaster or mistress, and they have an oak-paneled office and a nice big desk, and it frames the entire discussion in a way that may not benefit you.
I suppose it goes back down to our history of being, people. It all framing comes down to power status. Where do we fit in the pecking order? Are we alpha or not? And in any discussion, that's kind of what's happening, especially in negotiations. So it's important to know where you're sitting, the power control in any discussion. And a really interesting book on this that describes this very, very well is a book by Orrin Clough, Pitch Anything. Highly recommend that you read that.
I think people are very aware of, the way things are positioned, the way things are framed. There's always the concept that if you're the buyer, some people think they're almost the boss of the seller. There's almost that mentality, and they can, push prices down or be tough. Try that if you want to go in and buy a luxury product like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini from a prestigious dealership. You may find the framing slightly changes. And I think people are used to that. I've got a horror story that I want to bring up. I think Joanna's going to cover a few more items regarding framing. But I've got, sometimes you can find yourself being framed and you have to wonder, how do I get out of this situation?
Yeah, it's a really good story that Aidan's going to talk to you about. And maybe just to give some context and maybe think through the story, are some 4 very typical frames that people use during negotiations. So maybe think about these different frames when he talks through his story. Now, these 4 frames are called time frame. That's the first one. Do you know when people often maybe look at their watch or cut a meeting short or say, I'm going to leave if you come too late? They're using what's known as a time frame. The second one is the power frame, big bosses, CEOs. They want to be powerful and come across and show their power. So they will use that to their advantage in a conversation, in a meeting. Maybe they'll sit in the power position at the top of the table. Maybe they'll talk more, those sort of things. Moral authority frame is an interesting one. It's when you have the moral high ground in a conversation. And we all know those people, that go, you may be right, but, the good thing to do here is X, Y, and Z. They've completely undermined what you've just said by using a moral authority frame. And the final one is called the analyst frame, when they dismiss what you've said using things like facts, evidence, and really maybe using logic as a way to undermine emotion when both actually coexist in this world. So that's the final frame.
I've actually learned quite a bit listening there, and I can even recognize some of them in this story. This is from a couple of years ago when I was a pricing professional and I was helping a sales team in a B2B environment. We were selling to a French multinational. So we got an email through on a Friday evening demanding that we jump on a plane for the Monday and fly up to meet somebody who was jetting out from Paris. This was in Australia by mine. So we flew up to Brisbane on the Monday morning. We did not know what the meeting was for. They refused to give us any information in advance, clearly keeping us in the dark. And, I can feel that there was pressure on us. We had to get up early. We had to get there. We arrived at the location of the office, and we were kept waiting more than, I think, 45 minutes beyond what was required. In the meeting ahead of us, there was like a stream of different people going into a meeting, and I could hear shouting coming out of the meeting. You literally felt like you were going to you're a small kid back at school getting shouted at. And eventually, when our time for the meeting came up, we went in to meet somebody who, introduced themselves as a very, very important person jetting out from head office in Paris, and that we, framing us that we were very unimportant people. I think the initial thing was, how can you explain yourselves was almost the first question. And we were like, I don't even know how to answer that. So you start talking through the meeting. The meeting was incredibly awkward. The gentleman from Paris was badly dressed, unironed clothing, 4 days unshaved, looked like he hadn't slept, and to be honest, had virtually no idea as to what we were even selling, it appeared. It was more than just accusations. I think one of Joanna's points there was about an accusation that you're, not being moral, and the accusation was you're ripping us off, repeated 4 or 5 times and demanding explanations for it. When we tried to give any explanations, discuss things, the answer was, I'm too important to know this detail. You can work on it later and send it across to my assistants. The meeting really was ridiculous. I'll be honest, I still don't really know what they hope to achieve from it. I think the highlight for me was when the gentleman shouted at me, you're looking at your watch, you're so desperate to get out of this meeting. That's a sign of guilt. And then when I pointed out that I wasn't even wearing a watch, I think that was the final straw in the meeting. I think it stands out to me as a comical example of probably somebody going through the motions using this framing techniques. And I think we can tick all 4 of them off just from what Joanna mentioned. I actually don't know what was achieved in that meeting. And I think as a sales team, we'd have to learn from that and try to reframe it.
And the interesting point about that is, when you meet somebody who's obviously using all these framing techniques on you, it feels really bad. It feels uncomfortable. And often, if you're not aware of framing existing, then you're not going to respond in the right way. And what's just happened then is you've been framed, you've been controlled, and you are then beta. You're not alpha. And they've won that particular discussion. However, the good thing about this is power is it's in flux, it changes, and you can get the power status later, but only if you know how to use frame control. So I highly recommend that you learn these techniques, because it'll make you feel much more confident about yourself and where you sit in a situation, in a conversation. And then you can start having really meaningful conversations with your peers, your managers, and your customers.
Yeah, I think we'll leave it there. I'm still suffering nightmares from that experience. So I don't want to relive it. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. Bye.